Those were the days.
Hey everyone, Justin Lee Harold here, back with another edition of Those Are the Days Extended. Today I'm taking you back to February 20th, 1997, when John married Susan Banks, who was in labor posing as Kristen as she gave birth to their son, John Jr., later known as E.J. DiMera. Now, John actually surprised everyone by bringing in a priest to the labor because he wanted to make it official with Kristen before the baby came. So that part was a surprise. But yes, John inadvertently marries Susan Banks, not Kristen at this point. And it's got me going down a little bit of a rabbit hole. Not necessarily about Susan Banks. I think we've talked about her endlessly. She's a fan favorite. We love her. But just to talk about what was going on in Salem and the genesis of what was happening plot-wise to actually bring a character like Susan to the canvas and what was surrounding that. So we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into what was going on at that time. And we're actually going to start, actually going to take you back to August 1996 when Kristen is hospitalized after her mother, Rachel Blake, is killed in the Paris tunnels, and she actually miscarries the baby that she actually is pregnant with John Black. And this sort of plays into modern day. We see the theme of the woman in white coming back up in what we're watching now with the show. We have Rachel, who now actually is alive and survived those Paris tunnels, but back then she was theoretically killed. It was this death in the miscarriage of the baby that sort of tested Kristen, tested her soul and where she was going to end up ultimately. But if you remember at this point, Kristen, again, we've said such a complete change from who she was back in the early 90s. She was very much, again, the good DiMera. She was a good person. She was Alice Horton's protege, and she was this dedicated social worker who worked and really cared about kids. She was best friends with Jennifer Horton and Billy Reed, and just an all-around good person and really respected in the community. And then it was sort of this big shock to learn that she was actually Stefano DiMera's daughter, and she herself was very much shielded from all of the craziness in illegal activity that Stefano was up to at the time, especially with the people in Salem. So that's sort of the genesis of Kristen back then. But at this time, she's engaged to John. She's pregnant. They're planning a future. And then we have this sort of weird reveal by John that Marlena was sort of the love of his life. This was when he was on death row for Tony's murder. We later find out it's Andre, but we'll go with Tony at this point. And he sort of writes that infamous letter where he tells Marlena she's the love of his life. And if he had a choice, he would pick her. Kristen reads that letter. It completely changes her perspective on this idea of fighting fair for John. Because I think Marlena was always lurking in the background, but she really did love John. They had this connection. They wanted to move forward. Marlena was getting over her issues with Roman and everything. So this is kind of the trajectory of where everyone was going. John was very much committed to Kristen. They were going to have a baby. And then, he sort of lets this sort of this confession sort of comes out. So basically, while Rachel, again, she's connecting with her daughter, she's on a mission to kind of keep Kristen sane and not sort of pull or have her pull over to the dark side. We've talked about this on the show before, that Rachel Blake very much was the angel on Kristen's shoulder, while Stefano was the devil. It was always a constant tug of war with those two for Kristen to kind of see where she would end up, where her soul would ultimately lie. And we of course know that Stefano did win out in the end. And again, it was the fact that Rachel's death and miscarriage is what caused her to sort of push her over the edge and sort of have this mental breakdown, which I think people forget sometimes. It wasn't just Kristen deciding to join Stefano, or if you can't beat him, join him kind of a thing. It was the stuff with Rachel. It was the miscarriage. It was feeling like she was coming in second place of being the good person. And like we've talked about before, she really kind of was screwed over by John and Marlena at that point. And so that was all sort of fueling her decision, or that all sort of fueled the stress and the craziness that led her to actually have a legitimate mental breakdown. I think if you were watching at that time, it was just a riveting storyline. That Eileen is just a world-class actress to be able to portray that, and to see the switch of this character who we know as one thing, and to take her and completely change her into a different character. I think in a lesser actor or actress's hands, it would have fell flat or wouldn't have been meaningful. But I think Eileen just did it beautifully, and it was a real turning point. I think not only for the character but for the show. But keeping along with that storyline and where Susan Banks comes into play. So at this point, Stefano and Kristen's relationship is very damaged. She now is sort of angry with him because she's learned the truth about her biological parents and what happened to her. Her and Peter going to live with Stefano and Celeste back then. I think the story was always, of course, Stefano and Celeste were friends with Rachel and her husband. They died in a fire, and then Stefano and Celeste took them in. That was sort of what Kristen and Peter knew about their childhood, not knowing that Stefano sort of started the fire and ultimately was to blame for their deaths back then, because Rachel wouldn't leave her husband and run off with Stefano. So she's reeling from Stefano. She's not talking to him. She blames him not only for taking her and Peter away from their biological parents, but also for, at this point in the storyline, Rachel dying in the tunnels. So an attempt to kind of get in her good graces and also kind of kill two birds with one stone. Remember, Stefano was widely obsessed with Marlena. So the idea was that he, if John is preoccupied with his daughter and happily married and having a baby, then that leaves sort of Marlena open for him to kind of work on her and ultimately get her back. So that was Stefano's sort of idea. So he comes up with this plan to find a doppelganger to Kristen who can kind of pose as her, deliver a healthy baby to pass the baby off as her and John's. Kristen, fearing that she kind of would lose John, this is when she officially crosses over and says, okay, I'm going to give you, Stefano, another chance. I'm going to go along with this plan to keep John and to keep my family together. And that's when we are introduced to the infamous Susan Banks. What Kristen doesn't know is that Stefano, and you'll see in the picture we just had up, that Stefano actually dressed up as Elvis to seduce Kristen to seduce Susan to impregnate her so that she would be a pregnant doppelganger for Kristen. It just shows you sort of where Stefano was at that time too. And just a little reminder, he was sort of desperate to have his family. At this point, Tony, who we later find out is Andre, of course, is dead. Peter is sort of on the run because of his craziness that he had going on with Jack and Jennifer. So he's out of the picture. It is at this point revealed that Lexi is his daughter, and she, of course, wants absolutely nothing to do with him. He's known as the career criminal, and she can't believe she's his dad, so she wants nothing to do with him. So the only person he can sort of get to or have in his sort of his corner is Kristen, and that just goes to show you how desperate Stefano was at that time to sort of get Kristen back. That again, he impregnates Susan in order for her to be able, in order for her to be pregnant to be able to impersonate Kristen as he needed for this plan to sort of go off. And then what we see is, again, we get the introduction of Susan. She is this kooky, surreal character from Days. I think if we described it on paper, it would sound too outlandish and crazy. But again, Eileen is just a world-class actress, and I think her portrayal just instantly helped make Susan become this fan favorite that we all loved and sort of kind of got a kick out of. Again, character Susan was quickly integrated into the main storyline, and that she was actually kept around for an additional year. The 2.5-year storyline was supposed to actually end a year earlier, and it was actually extended because Susan was such a fan favorite character and the ratings were really good. So after expanding her role, again, to keep around, and then we see a change in Susan. She sort of starts to develop these feelings for John, and she sort of starts to get used to this idea of pretending to be this more, sort of sophisticated, wicked woman that Kristen is. And she kind of has these sort of machinations of, I can have this life. If I can actually just get rid of Susan, I could be with John myself, and we can, I'm already passing this baby off as his. Maybe I can actually make this work. So she sort of double crosses Kristen, locks her into the cellar, the infamous cellar, with Marlena, and that's when we had that whole funny storyline of Marlena and Kristen in the cellar watching this infamous wedding that we see here, this Elvis-themed wedding between Susan and John. And John, of course, thinks this is Kristen. we have all seen the scene that will live in infamy when they are shaking her, and then her head turns and the fake teeth that Susan is wearing shoots across the room, and I think lands on Vivian or lands in her drink or something to that effect, and sort of everyone is clued in that, oh, this woman is not Kristen. That wasn't the end of the storyline. It went on for a little while longer, but it was sort of the pinnacle of it and sort of the culmination of the storyline. Was sort of this idea that as kooky and crazy and sort of surreal and off that Susan was, that she was also very intelligent, and she was able to sort of size people up in these people of Salem, and that she, it would be a mistake to sort of underestimate her. But yeah, just to give you a little backstory of what was going on at this time and how this sort of came to be, how this character came to be. James Ian Reilly, infamous head writer at the time, infamous for the campiness in the out of the box storylines that he loves to bring to days, such as the possession storyline. He kind of wanted to bring a very different character into the mix, and it was actually Eileen who should actually get a lot of credit for this. The idea originally was that they were going to bring in a different actress to play Susan, and that she would sort of be a look-alike, of what we know as more of a modern, actual, real look-alike to Eileen, the actress, in the character of Kristen. So the character of Susan was never actually meant to be played by Eileen or to be played sort of double duty. But it was Eileen who actually sort of raised her hand and was like, you know what, I'm kind of interested in the challenge here. How about I play Susan, and we could sort of, make the storyline a little bit more flawless and not have the audience sort of, have to squint their eyes and believe that this other actress is passing as Kristen. So she sort of pitched it to them, and they sort of went with it. And then, we got this idea that she's going to play Kristen and Susan. What she didn't know is that she'd be signing up for these 16-hour work days, 6 days a week. She was coming in on Saturdays. Not only was she playing Kristen, but she also inadvertently signed up to play all of the Bank siblings. And if you're watching at that time, we know, again, she was playing Kristen, she was playing Susan, she was playing Sister Mary Moira here, she was playing Thomas, a man, and then she was playing Penelope. So at this point, she is now playing 5 roles. That's what contributed to the 16-hour, 6-day work weeks that Eileen was doing. And she's been very vocal and candid about that time and how crazy it was. And yes, she was the one who signed up for it and wanted the challenge, and she definitely got one. She talked about developing sort of digestive issues, some other health issues, insomnia she was dealing with. She was on set literally from dusk till dawn. So after a year playing Susan, Eileen was at the end of her contract. The idea was that she was going to leave. She needed a break. And then this is actually when they extended the Susan character in the siblings for another additional year. They did this because Eileen was actually so great at it. The ratings were through the roof. And it was like, we can't say goodbye to Susan and Kristen just yet. Let's string them along. Let's stretch this out a little bit more. So Eileen ended up playing this character, or these characters, another full year in addition to it. And that's, I think, what really contributed to her at the end of the full end of this 2.5-year storyline, being able to say, you know what, I put in my work. I think it's good to, I'm going to retire Kristen and Susan for a little while longer. I don't think anyone at that point knew it was going to be another maybe 15 years until we saw Kristen, but I think Eileen really at that point needed that break. She deserved it. James E. Reilly actually says that later he actually had to call Eileen when everything was said and done and really apologize to her for sort of working her so hard and really coming up, especially with the Bank siblings, as another adage to who she would play. Eileen, of course, took it in stride and said she accepted the apology and said she was the one who originally signed up for this. She wanted the challenge. She, of course, didn't know it would be that much of a challenge, but she sort of took it in stride. But I think we all sort of understood why, when she left, when she did, why she needed that break. But yeah, I think Eileen, I think we regard her as such a great actress, but I don't think she always gets the credit she deserves, especially at this time, not only for portraying this character of Kristen, and she was great in that, but really when they made that switch to make her evil. And then on top of that, you're bringing in the Susan stuff, you're bringing in the Bank siblings, you're fundamentally changing the course of this character and who she is and who she signed up to play. And I think Eileen just did it brilliantly. Of course, we know it was probably hell on her behind the scenes, kind of doing all this, but I think she's earned our respect in her regard, as we regard her as such a great actress. She just was amazing during that time. So again, no, she doesn't currently isn't playing Kristen, isn't playing Susan anymore, but I think she deserves a lot of credit for introducing that character and making her such a fan favorite. Like I said, the character on paper would sort of be someone we would probably roll our eyes about and sort of dismiss, but I think Eileen infused her with a lot of intelligence and innocence and warmth that I think the audience really gravitated toward that. So yeah, that was a little deep dive into the genesis of Miss Susan Banks here, a fan favorite of ours, of course. So yeah, thanks. And I'll see you next time on another edition of Those Were the Days Extended. Take care.
Those were